Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, the code is RPG City, and it's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through Saturday, July 31st. You heard that right, folks. There's plenty of time to cash in this code, RPG City, at Noble Knight Games for 10% off orders of $10 or more, because this promo is running until July 31st. Never been a better time to get back to gaming with your friends. New games, old games, whatever you're looking for, Noble Knight has it, and they're ready to part with it and add it to your collection. So don't forget, when you're checking out at Noble Knight Games, online or in person, RPG City is the code for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through Saturday, July 31st. From our friends over at Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and today we're having a cool chat with Andrew Walter. Now, Andrew got on our radar because we've seen some of the covers of Old School Essentials that he did, as well as some of the work for Melsonian Art Council and Troika. We fell in love with his artwork. We love our UK artists, so we thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring him on and talk a little bit about the art scene in the world of RPGs. Stu's with me as always, so without further ado, hey Andrew, how's it going today?
Not bad, mate. Thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan. I think you guys are up there with the Grognard files in terms of like comforting RPG podcast listens. So it's great to be here.
Nice.
Oh, thanks so much, man. We always appreciate hearing that. And thank you. You've done some amazing artwork. I mean, for me, the covers of Old School Essentials is what really drew me into wanting to play that game. And, you know, Stu and I, we talk about this all the time. The cover art is some of the most important art of any book because it's the first interaction that you have with that media. And that's the thing that needs to draw you in. Like, you don't get a trailer, you know, you don't have audio ads for it. You have this cover that is sitting on the shelf of a bookstore. Maybe sometimes it's even the spine. But when you see that cover, that's initially your first reaction. So that's what drew me into Old School Essentials, was your cover artwork. Stu, how about you?
I don't honestly know. I think it might have been Troika, and just how like wonderfully bizarre. I think it was Troika, or maybe Fronds of Benevolence. I kind of had Fronds first.
That's interesting. You had Fronds before Troika.
Yeah. It just happened to show up that way. And I think that might have been the first cover art of yours that I've seen. Yeah, just so like weird and melty and not really what I expected from RPG art. And I was sort of like, oh, like, what's this all about? And the color palette's super strange too. It's like very pastel, which a lot of RPG art kind of hews towards the bold 4-color comic book sort of school of contrasty art. So subverting expectation and being super, super weird and intriguing just drags you right in.
I love the melty. I mean, I think all of my favorite artists are pretty melty. Every visual I can think of that I like is quite melty. So that's a good touch point, I think.
Just give me an example.
Well, I mean, Errol Otis is very melty, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he is.
Russ Nicholson. And also like stuff outside of RPGs. Like I'm really into death metal and grindcore and a lot of old demo, like especially the 90s stuff. People like Dan Seagrave, just a lot of old, you know, when cover art was still done by hand, anything that's death metal or grindcore based is, generally looks like it's dripping off of the front cover, which is always cool.
That's true. As soon as he said it, though, like Errol Otis, very melty, but like I never in a million years would have like used that as my first descriptor. But that's interesting and like makes the connections.
He's one of those guys that like I was quite lucky when I was growing up because I kind of had like a transatlantic exposure to kind of gaming art because I lived in the US for about 3.5 years because my dad moved over there for work. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I used to go to the library and they had all the AD&D monster manuals and stuff in the Fiend Folio. And you know, when you're a kid, you sort of don't really associate an artist with a particular name. You just know these cool monster illustrations and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, Otis was all one that I just remember, even though I took like a bit of a break from gaming, that kind of stuff like kind of merged in my head with Russ Nicholson as being just sort of a cool way you could draw. And yeah, it's definitely stuck in there. I didn't even know his name until I got back into gaming in like 2008 or so.
Oh, wow. Is that how you got into art? Was it seeing the role-playing art? Were you always sort of in this orbit?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably that. It's doing stuff like, I mean, playing old DOS RPGs like the Ultima games, Ultima
Mhm.
Underworld, and all that kind of stuff. And fighting fantasy, obviously the game books in the UK are a massive thing. So seeing Russ Nicholson as an artwork there, even though I didn't know who he was, and it was just trying to draw cool, guys with swords fighting monsters and stuff when I was a kid. And then, yeah, just always kept drawing, and then kept drawing. Went to college to study art, and then went to university. But a lot of the stuff when I was at university, there was very kind of like a snobbery about anything genre related, any sci-fi or fantasy art. So I didn't really start doing any of that stuff again until I got back into RPGs after Gary Gygax died and stuff in around 2008. And then, like, from there, it was just hanging out on Google Plus. Rest in peace.
I missed that whole scene, and it bothers me so much because
Yeah.
people love it so much.
Oh, you never actually got involved in that?
Yeah,
You
no,
were-
I'm very much like outside of everything. So
Yeah, that feels like the last time that I mean, there's loads of good stuff going on now, like more than ever. It's actually kind of insane how much good stuff is coming out. But I feel like that was the last time I felt like I was actually properly embedded in like a community, is when there was OSR blogs and Google Plus, really. Because there's like Discord now, but that's a bit like 10,000 MSN Messenger conversations going on at once. It's too quick. There's too much stuff.
when you were a kid, was your art always weird, melty?
Yeah, I think so. It was things with like, anything with more than, well, if there was less than 3 eyeballs, they wwere always on stalks, put it that way. So like, yeah, I don't know, big insects, demons. I remember going back to when I was at school in America, I didn't, because obviously like the kind of culture of I missed the whole satanic panic thing, I was too young for that. But I do remember distinctly, when I was at school in America, there was a competition to like draw a team mascot. And the name of the team was the Paranormals, right? The high school sport. I can't remember what sports team it was. I never cared about sports. And I drew like a full-on, like, yeah, first edition AD&D style demon being summoned out of a pentagram. And they were like, no, I don't think we can use it. I'm not sure it really fits the general vibe. I was like, okay, right.
See, if I had a high school team that was the Paranormals, I probably would have given a shit a lot more about sports. We had the Golden Griffins, which in hindsight, you could have done a lot with in a very fantasy way, but it was just like a big gold bird with like...
Yeah, I can see the Dave Trampier style Golden Griffins logo now. It looks amazing.
My high school was the Cardinals, spelled with a K because I'm from Kearney with a K.
Okay.
It's a little
kind
on
of
the
reaching
nose.
a bit, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess after that, it was like, I didn't really think anyone kind of gave a shit about my like fantasy stuff. And then it was kind of seeing stuff like Errol Otis again, like when I was in my 20s. I was like, oh, actually, I can kind of already do stuff like that. So I just started putting it up on Google Plus. And then I think one of the first things I contributed to was probably Petty Gods, which I know you've mentioned before on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Which is actually, looking back at it now, it's kind of like a who's who of like, people that illustrate for the OSR and stuff. There's some really good stuff in there.
Yeah, it's weird how much of like, yeah, it's like a phone book almost.
Yeah, for sure. And I think actually a lot of creators used it that way, I think that a lot of writers and stuff kind of got in touch with artists via Petty Gods, maybe. It was one of the first times I can think of there was one big, like a directory of artists in the kind of OS. I mean, I keep saying OSR. I don't even know if that's the right term anymore, but you guys know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I mean, like OSR was like a moment in time. I feel like that we've moved beyond, but like everybody still uses the word as sort of like a vague, the way that MP3 players were all iPods.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of way.
It just takes too long to say I don't like playing 5th edition D&D.
Yeah, it's everything being described as punk.
Yeah.
But it's not punk, it's what the interpretation of punk is in the year 2000 to like 2020.
Yeah, for sure.
Like real punk lasts 2 years and then moved immediately to post-punk. So
yeah,
everything after that's been labeled punk. It's like, well, yeah, I get what you mean. So you're not just an RPG artist either. You've written a couple RPGs or supplements.
Yeah.
We already talked about Fronds of Benevolence. I just have to say that when people are sort of come to me about Troika and are baffled by it, which I feel like is a super fair reaction to Troika.
Yeah.
I point them to Fronds of Benevolence because that's the thing that made Troika make sense to me. Because like seeing it, like the adventure and being able to kind of like see how the rules move through this really weird, irreverent kind of adventure where it's almost like nonsense poems, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But I think that Franz really grounds the Troika experience in a way that helps people understand it. So kudos for that.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I remember there's like it's not even a review, but just the best review of Fronds of Benevolence. On the Questing Beast video review of it, someone's left a comment underneath saying, looks cool, but clearly too weird to ever actually use. I was like, okay, I mean, it's cool that you think that, whoever you are, internet guy, but like, it's clearly not the case. Because like you say, I've had a lot of people tell me that they've used it as their first way of like getting their teeth into Troika, which is really cool. And it's really, I don't know, it's really flattering to hear that, because it was originally just it was like a threat from Daniel Sell. He was like, well, we're going to do the Troika Numinous Edition Kickstarter, and you better watch out, man, because when we hit this target, you're going to be committed to writing an adventure. And then one day he texted me being like, boom, like, we've done it. You've got to do it now. I'm like, oh, okay. So, yeah, I already had the kind of notes to it and stuff from just running Troika. And yeah, I was really amused to hear David on your interview with him, where he was saying how he was gutted that he'd just done some black and white stuff for Acid Death Fantasy, and then he was like, oh great, he saw Fronds and he's like, great, now I've got to do it in color. I need to upscale everything. Yeah, but Fronds is, yeah, that was really fun. I do want to do some more Troika stuff, actually. It's just finding the time, I've got so much on.
Was that the first adventure that you wrote and published?
I guess that was. I wrote a few things for Wormskin, the Dolmenwood zine.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much adventures, it was more just like kind of monster write-ups and little location write-ups and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Fronds was the first thing that was kind of, fully written by me and put out.
Is it very different being weird in words compared to being weird in illustration?
I don't think so, because I mean, a lot of the stuff that I read a lot as well, like not just, I try and read outside of kind of fantasy as well, outside of fantasy and sci-fi, because I think it's quite easy to like sort of pigeonhole yourself. If all of your touch points are the same as everyone else's, it's quite easy to get stuck in a rut, I guess. And just generally, I like words, I find them really kind of inspiring, and I'm always curious about how other people read fiction and stuff, but I feel like it's quite visual when I do it. I have quite a strong mind's eye picture and stuff. So it's kind of one and the same, really. The only thing is I feel a bit less, how do I put it? I don't know, maybe slightly less confident writing than drawing, I suppose.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And then you also did Slipgate Chokepoint recently.
Yeah, that was kind of a milestone because it was the first Kickstarter I've ever done, which was kind of a hair-raising experience, but fun. So yeah, Slipgate Chokepoint is actually, I really kind of Venn diagrammed myself into obscurity with this. It was me and my friend Paul, right? So I don't know if you guys know a game called Stay Frosty.
I don't know Stay Frosty, but
okay,
outside of Slipgate Chokepoint. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, Stay Frosty is a sick old school game inspired technically, I think, by the Black Hack, and it is by Casey Gask. And it is, sorry to use it again, John, but it's punk as hell. And it's got this, it's based around any kind of film or computer game where a bunch of grunts take on, bugs, androids, xenomorphs, anything horrible like that. And it has a rapidly escalating tension scale in it until people freak out and have a meltdown. Game over, man. Exactly. And it's got a really cool, it's profanity laden. It's got really kind of rough pixel art, which I love. The tone of it is just, it really spoke to me. Me and my friend Paul C., who is the guy from G+, had for ages been batting forth ideas about games and that kind of thing. We're both massive fans of old like DOS FPS games, first-person shooter games, so things like Doom and Quake. And I just always thought, it'd be cool if someone took Stay Frosty and made it even more like one of those old 90s FPS games. And it was just our attempt to kind of do that. It's like a love letter to old, 90s DOS shooters, basically. It's a hack of a hack, basically, because it's a hack of Stay Frosty, which is itself a hack of the Black Hack, if that makes any sense to anyone that's not involved in the OSR, It just sounds like gibberish now I say it out loud, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it sort of screams like Doom and Hexen to me.
Oh, Hexen. Nice name drop, man. One of my favorites. Underrated game. Brilliant.
The follow-up was Heretic?
No, Hexen was the follow-up to Heretic.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They were both good.
Yeah, brilliant. We actually did, me and Paul we're never going to do this, or at least not going to put as much, because it took us like 2 years to do Slipgate Chokepoint, but we keep saying, we're going to do another hack of it, which converts that into Hexen and Heretic style medieval slasher shoot 'em up games. But at that point, we'd be shooting off the edge of absurdity, I think.
You just put the idea out into the world, you spoke it, so now it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So to be clear, it's a hack of a hack of a hack of a hack.
Yeah. If we did that one, that would be a quadruple hack, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So
amazing.
Yeah, you don't just need this book to play it, but also these ones. We did think about making it standalone, but we love Stay Frosty so much, and we just wanted to support. It's a game that almost no one's heard of because Casey is, I'm going to say it again, he's punk as hell, and he doesn't really care. He just makes games because he loves them. Like there was a Kickstarter he did over Zine Quest called Space Weirdos, I think, which is like a miniatures game. All of these stuff's got this great spirit running through it. Every time you go and look at Casey Garsk games, he does awesome stuff. So we wanted to just give him a bit more exposure by doing that, and yeah, that's why we did the Kickstarter.
So what's the scene like over there in the UK? I feel like there is like a bit of a more punk attitude across the pond, where it's sort of like making games sort of for their own sake without really a commercial consideration. Do you think that's true, or am I misreading it?
It might be. I mean, I think to some degree people are proud of that aspect of British gaming because that's what it was like in the past, obviously, when you had stuff like the Fiend Folio versus all the American monster books and stuff like that. I think it's kind of similar over here now to the US in a way, but Dan Sell from Smithsonian Arts Council would probably kill me for saying that because he's very kind of like everything he does. He's just like, we want to touch, we need to jump off of British like touchstones because he really loves that kind of vibe, like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay and fighting fantasy and stuff like that. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it kind of is quite like punk and gritty, the stuff that people come out with here. But I feel like the stuff in the US is as well at the moment. I don't know if you guys have seen that Vaults of Varn zine by Leo Hunt.
No.
That's one of the best British zines at the moment, I think. It's like a sort of Dying Earth style setting, kind of inspired by the Hyperion novels and Book of the New Sun and stuff like that. Yeah, it's really good, really nicely done, complete one-man show. Like he sort of doesn't really have any art training, but he's said that he's trying to improve as he goes along. And it's just stuffed with like great content in a really small kind of zine thing and stuff like that makes me think, yeah, we've got quite a cool scene over here. And then you've got things like Lost Pages as well, which is Paolo Greco's imprint. There's like all the kind of, forget the name now, is it Wonder and Wickedness, the spell system he did, I think?
Yeah, Wonders and Wickedness, and then there's Marvels and Malisons was the follow-up.
That's it, yeah.
Those are so good.
I'm still going to count Gavin from Old School Essentials in the scene, even though he doesn't live here.
I was going to say he's in Berlin.
He is in Berlin, but he's from the UK originally. But yeah.
There's sort of just like you mentioned Fiend Folio and Russ Nicholson and Fighting Fantasy and all of that early stuff. I always have such a hard time sort of expressing what like the aesthetic difference is between UK and US RPG stuff, but there is definitely like it's different, and I know it when I see it. Like I can pick out a British RPG artist immediately. Do you have any insight on like what the foundational difference is there, or is it as mystifying to you as it is to me?
I reckon to some degree, like I think it's two things. So one, it seems like the classic way of doing British fantasy is it's not afraid to get like really ugly and kind of squalid and kind of gritty and that sort of thing, and quite violent as well. But at the same time, it's also not afraid to get really silly and like not take itself too seriously. And that to me, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I run a game or play in a game, there's, even if it's, I mean, maybe not so much with something like Call of Cthulhu, but 90% of games, I guess I would say, 90% of role playing to me, there is this heavy element of like, yeah, silliness and kind of absurdity in it. Like it's not really I don't know, in pop culture, when you see people playing role playing games, they're always giving these like epic sort of monologues about marvelous vistas and stuff like that. I try and do all that when I play a game as well, but at the same time, we're still a bunch of goofs just sort of sitting around,
totally
killing stuff.
And even my Call of Cthulhu games are like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the finest line of all with Call of Cthulhu for me. Like it's really difficult. But I think stuff like when you look in the Russ Nicholson illustration in the Fiend Folio, the full page one of the Grell fight, that like sums up to me because it's really kind of terrifying. Like it's absolutely terrifying because the Grell is one of the scariest D&D monsters, I think.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, but it's also got this sort of like the look on the adventurer's face as he's being kind of wrapped up in the tentacles. He's about to stab the thing. There's something about that which is just a bit like, I don't know, it's like something you'd get in like an old British sitcom or something, like a Rick Mail sitcom or something. It's this kind of like everything's going wrong. Everything's on the verge of going wrong, basically.
It's the perfect balance of artsy and fartsy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
And, speaking of balance, the covers that you did for Old School Essentials, perfect example of that, because there is a certain silliness that comes from the melty style, but also a seriousness because you have like this badass dragon about to take out these adventurers, while at the same time, I got to give you so much credit because there's a lot going on the cover that really does show you the different things that you can do in an RPG. You got like the little wizard with magic boots and he's floating above the dragon's blast. And you got the sweet little dude coming in there with the axe, like to save the day. Like it's something that you don't generally see on a lot of covers. Like, you have like the kind of, I call it in a lot of ways, the cheesecake shot on the cover where it's just like, buff people or really handsome people kind of doing what you would think that a person like that would do in an RPG, but you don't really see much of that in the actual RPG here. Like, I think it's a grand illustration of like, hey, you can get weird. It's an RPG. And I think you really walk that line beautifully where there is a lot of danger on there, but there's a lot of heart in there as well.
Oh, cheers, man. They're funny, those covers, because I actually think, sometimes when you do something creative, a lot of the time you look back at them after a couple of years and like those covers are things that I think I could do a lot better now. Because they were originally used for the BX Essentials before it got relaunched and stuff. And then there was the really successful Kickstarter for Necrotic Gnome, and they kind of blew up. And I think loads more people saw them than I ever expected would. And by the time they did, it was a bit like, I don't know, I was never really that comfortable, because I'm proud of them, obviously. I'm glad that so many people saw those. But I think that now I could do color stuff like that a lot more dynamically and I don't know. I think I could nail them if I had another crack at those, basically. But generally, I think that, what you're saying about this, what the separate dudes are doing and what you can do. I always feel like my favorite big dynamic fantasy scenes on gaming products, they look more like, I don't know, like the computer game Lemmings or something. Like everyone's got their own little role. There's loads of them. A lot of them are dying. It's going wrong for a lot of them. So like on the, obviously the player's handbook and stuff, the AD&D one, I don't know how many adventurers are on there, but
there's something like a dozen. It's a ridiculous number.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's more of an aftermath. Well, it's probably actually, again, just before things go wrong, obviously. But I don't know. I just like detailed images and lots of little personalities or snapshots of what's going on, basically.
Yeah, a lot of it. Now that you mentioned that, I feel like the original Sutherland cover for the Monster Manual is sort of like a good template for what you're kind of saying, because it's like that flat cross-section view that is like absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
You can see how like characters would interact in that kind of space.
Yeah.
And all of that is very like tabletop RPG, and to a certain extent like video gamey before we had that visual language for video games. But yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think people like that's the one cover out of those classic, first edition ones that people often kind of, they slag off a little bit. But I don't know, I love it. I don't really, people say, oh, it's kind of bad art compared to the other ones and stuff, but I don't know. I've never really been comfortable with that. It's sort of like this is the same thing. Like, I don't understand when people say stuff about music, about albums, where they're like, oh, it would be really good, that album, except for the production or except for the way that the snare drum sounds. And I always just think, well, it's not. It's not different. So you just have to accept it on its own terms. And that Sutherland cover is him doing like the best he could, right?
Oh man, I feel so attacked because I've said that exact thing about And Justice for All.
So in fairness, I think everybody said that same thing about Injustice for All.
Well, then a lot of people are going to feel attacked.
Well,
as we should.
The way around that is just by listening to just Kill 'Em All and then just sticking with Exodus and Slayer. You don't have to bother with the rest.
Yeah, that is true. There are no real good Metallica albums after Ride the Lightning.
Please send your hate mail to Vintage RPG.
I understand why people think that cover is bad. There's certain elements of it that are perplexing, especially the way that he tries to do the motion lines and or the repaint of the dragon wings.
Yeah.
But it is such a good cover. Like, it so distills something essential about that you don't get from the other two covers at all. And like I said, like I never really thought about this before, but it really does kind of anticipate a lot of side-scrolling video game like visual vocabulary in a cool way. And he generally is sort of like the most unfairly derided of the early D&D artists. He was awesome. He just didn't have time to be awesome all the time. So a lot of his stuff is sketchier than I think that he would have preferred it to be.
I was just saying, I think he suffered by being put next to Trampier like stuff all the time, because that's like, I don't know, probably the best D&D artwork there will ever be, in my opinion, his stuff.
And he was like an engraver, so of course it's like going to be super precise.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's a certain degree of, and you can too, from the Sutherland work, which I always appreciate, because it gives you that kind of kinship with it, because sometimes when you're looking at high art, you're like, well, I don't have the necessary attachment to it because I could never do that, and not even in a self-limiting way. It's just like, I could never do that.
Yeah.
But some of the Sutherland stuff, you're like, man, I would have drawn that on my notebook. I would have drawn that on like the cover of like my social studies book that I had to wrap in like brown shopping paper bag, to protect it, because it's like technically a loner. Like there's something kind of special and cool about that.
And they also could be, that could be the stuff that, the adventurers draw in the tavern to say, this is what I saw and it was terrible,
That's true too.
Exactly.
I definitely did draw that troll on the Monster Manual cover a lot. And I also was aware of the fact that I was not Trampier. Like as a kid, like his illustrations are amazing, but like drawing that, no, I could never doodle that.
I'm a professional illustrator, and I'm very aware of the fact I'm not Trampier every time I draw something. Yeah.
I think most of us quickly become painfully aware that we're not Trampier.
It's pretty dismaying, really.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've talked a lot about Trampier, Andrew, what do you have coming out soon?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. I mean, there's a lot of commission stuff that will be coming out that I don't know how much I can talk about. There's one I'm sure he wouldn't mind me talking about, but I don't know if you know the guy behind the Singing Flame publishing label. He runs I think his Instagram account is just called OSR RPG, and he always puts cool stuff up. But his name's Vasily Kalaman, and he's doing it's a setting book called Nightland, which is inspired by kind of sort of non-Tolkien fantasy, like Clark Ashton Smith, William Hope Hodgson, and that kind of stuff. And I did all the illustrations for that, so I'm pretty proud of the way that came out.
Nice.
I'm doing the next, it's in playtesting at the moment, but I've got the first standalone adventure for Slipgate Chokepoint coming out soonish.
Awesome.
Called Ectotectonics, as in ectoplasmic tectonics.
Nice.
So that's literally got one more playtest session, and then needs a quick run through layout, and then that's done. All the illustrations are done for it. And I have a Troika project which will be playtesting soon, which should hopefully be out by the end of the year, which is it's kind of inspired by films like Gremlins, Basket Case, Chud, all that kind of stuff. So the players take on the role of like horrible little rubbery demons wrecking shit in the human realm. That's going to be called Greebaloids. So that's going to be a Troika product. And I mean, I could talk about quite a few things, really. I'm putting out a little interactive fiction zine called Revenge of the Foaming Mutant, which is a sort of a Chainsaw Warrior type thing, which is another British gaming reference that I'm sure some people will get. And I think as of the moment of recording this morning, I got up to 1,000 followers on Instagram. So I'm going to do some kind of, I don't know when this is going to come out, but I want to do like a kind of a giveaway draw for people. I might give away a copy of Fronds and maybe some original art or something. So yeah, check out my Instagram, Andrew J. Walter Illustration.
1,000 was me, by the way.
Was it?
Yeah.
Really?
You don't have to give me nothing for it. You can send the prize to someone else, but it was me.
Nice, man. Yeah, you definitely deserve something for that. I'll make it happen.
So that's your Instagram. Where can people find you online otherwise?
I don't know how many people look at this. I think normal, quote unquote, normal websites are dying, but I'm quite proud of it. So go and check it out. It's andrewwalter.co.uk. That's kind of my main portfolio, which has recently been updated. And I have a big cartel site where people can buy prints. So I've got a couple of screen print, like hand pulled screen prints and stuff like that, and some digital prints that people can buy. And I cannot remember the address of it, but if you just search Andrew Walter Big Cartel, you'll find it.
Oh, actually, I remember. It's GOOGLE. You'll find it.
Exactly. That's the one. That's the website. Yeah.
Andrew, it's been brilliant talking to you. Dear listener, definitely take the time to check out Andrew's stuff. It is nothing short of amazing. And with that, I'm going to say this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting stuff about RPGs that aren't necessarily vintage because, how can you ignore the work of Andrew Walter?
That's right. You can find me on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. Sometimes I pop on Twitter. Sometimes I don't. You could also check out our Patreon. If you like the podcast, really like the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/vintage RPG. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book that he is barreling towards finishing. We've got a look at my RPG 321 action in the first adventure, Rocket to Russia. We've also got some behind-the-scenes stuff for Vintage RPG, early release episodes, and a killer Discord community just for the patrons. We'd love to chat with you. Patreon.com/Vintage RPG. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.